The debate is over. How should you structure your software teams? That question is now answered in this year's State of DevOps Report 2023. Also included are questions answered like, how does AI in fact affect my company's and team's performance? Or how can we quantify the impact of culture on performance, burnout, and what even is culture in the first place? All these things are included in the State of DevOps Report 2023, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And I'll be doing that with a very special guest, Eric Maxwell, I always call him saying Eric Maxwell, which I'll be introducing later because first, let me say welcome. Welcome everyone to Sleuth TV Live. I love these wide angle lenses where my hands just look massive. Welcome to Sleuth TV Live, where we are here to talk about techniques, tools, tips, interview folks about giving you ideas on how you can improve your software team's performance, how you can continuously improve it, how you can track it, all this kind of stuff. All software leaders, we're all in the same boat together, and that's what we're here today is to talk about that, share some tips, share some learnings so that we can all get better. Sleuth TV Live is a live program. This is all live on YouTube. If you are watching it live, please feel free to use the chat. We love to interact with people. We'll be happy to answer questions as it's happening. We'll bring them up on screen. We'll have Eric answer some. I'll answer some. We want to keep it a very interactive performance program. This is not a fully scripted, top-down tech talk. This is more like a fireside chat. So, for those who are watching after the fact, please feel free to comment and like the video, obviously, if it's interesting to you. But also comment if you have a question and want us to expand on something. We're always happy to interact with folks. So make this a two-way thing. This is actually the third part of our third season of Sleuth TV Live, which is Sleuth TV Live, as I mentioned, is a periodic live show. I was thinking about that on the way over here. Periodic meaning there is a period. The period changes. It is not a fixed period. So sometimes we'll do one a couple months later and sometimes 6 months later. You never know. But anyways, it's a live show where we chat with you. Welcome to a few folks. We have Matt, who can't wait. I hope to meet and exceed your expectations and hear more from you. Igor and Michael, welcome as well. The three parts we've had, the first part was where we met with Nathan Harvey, also from the DORA organization at Google Cloud, to talk about DORA and a little bit about the State of DevOps report before it was released. The second one, we talked about Sleuth automations, which takes a lot of the ideas from DORA and puts them into one-click, no-code automations. Some people say ClickOps, which is an interesting term. Some people think that's a bad thing. Some people it's a good. Anyways, I digress. And then finally, we get to the third one today, which is looking at the report now that it's been released. Not just, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm really excited to talk to Eric, so I will just go ahead and bring him on. Welcome, everybody, and especially welcome, Eric Maxwell.
Thanks, Don.
So Eric, as I kind of alluded to, I'm really excited about speaking to Eric today because Eric is not only a member of the DORA group, I keep calling it DORA group, DORA team. What do you guys call yourselves?
DORA team works.
DORA team. Okay, the DORA team at Google Cloud. But what's interesting about Eric is his role in that. He is the head of the implementation team. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that means.
Sure. Yeah, so I run what we call our DevOps transformation practice. And my role very specifically is to work with Google Cloud's top customers. And I teach them how do they actually implement the research that we do from a DORA perspective. And that's I think what kind of sets what I do apart from the rest of the DORA team is that just heavily focused on how can we apply the research in day-to-day lives to make those lives of developers better, to improve organizational performance.
That's an interesting point. Well, I just want to highlight one more time. You're on implementation. You actually put this stuff into practice. So you're not the group that goes out there and says, hey guys, this is all awesome, and here is the key points, and let me help educate you on it. You're the person who says, okay, I'll take all the theory, I'll take all the ideas. Now that you've been sold on it, I'm going to take them and put them into practice in an organization that may be ready for DORA, maybe not ready for DORA, maybe has some idea that, because you were talking about some of the clients when we were talking about earlier, that are really pre-DevOps transformation. They're in very different ways of working.
Yeah, absolutely. There are still plenty of organizations out there that do not have fully automated CI in place. And so you it's one thing for early adopters, for digital native unicorns. They're going to operate in a much different way, and the complexities of larger organizations are going to be much different as well. And so the way that you approach the implementation, the education is also going to be a lot different, and frankly much more challenging.
Right. All right. So and I wanted to go through all of this before we even get into the state of DevOps report, which I know is why most people are here, is they want to hear about what's in the state of DevOps report. They want to hear your take on it as an implementer. But I wanted to make sure people understood where you're coming from on this. You're not someone who is trying to get the message out about the information. You're the person that is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to all this. So
Yeah.
let's get into the, well, actually, always forget to click the next screen button. Here we go. On to this section, the state of DevOps report. Let's talk about the report itself. There is so much in here. I'm going to share my screen real quickly here. So this is the report for those who don't know. This is the State of DevOps 2023 report. You can access this for free at dora.dev, and you can download it, take a look. It says 95 pages. It actually feels like it reads a lot quicker to me. I don't know what you think about, Eric.
Yeah, for sure. We have a lot of, the fonts are large. There's lots of graphics and things like that. So it's definitely a faster read than it would seem at first glance.
Yeah, I have to admit, there is a section of IT where people are, all about, research papers and academic papers, and they're like, "Oh, did you read the latest one?" And I have to admit, that's never been me because it just, I fall asleep. So when I heard data DevOps report, it's like, oh, another one. But actually, this one is very pretty. And what's more interesting than its aesthetic appeal is its way to take a complicated topic and make it really easy. I could go through this whole thing, but obviously we don't want to. I just wanted to pull up these key findings because these are 7 things that they found that are highlights. There's a lot of other details in here. Again, I recommend you read it for yourself. But I wanted to hear from you, from someone who's been in the DORA group for a while, someone who's been out on the streets helping to implement it. What are, say, 3 things in these key findings that really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, first I want to say, with regards to the report itself, we did take, so funny thing, our goal this year was to make the report shorter than it was last year. And we failed miserably. We actually made it longer than it was last year. But we took great care to try to present the information in a way that would work for people that wanted to consume a long research report, and also for people that wanted to be able to skim the report and get actionable information. So, we did like our takeaways in the beginning, but also in each of the sections, we kind of started each section with a TLDR. So I say this in, if you are a skimmer, don't let the 95 pages, cause you not to want to read it, because you can just read sort of the high level takeaways in the beginning of each of the section. Um, so, I mean, geez, three takeaways out of 95 pages. I guess for me, the user centric portions and like the importance of being a user centric organization stood out, because many of the conversations that I'm having day to day with customers focus around how do we deliver value faster, and how do we transform our organization from being a feature driven organization into a user centric organization. So it seems perfectly timed for what the industry is going through right now. I mean, we were both at the DevOps Enterprise Summit together, and I was kind of joking when we came back, when I was reflecting on the conference, that almost every single conversation was around product or platform engineering and delivering value to users, and how do you kind of reorganize your organization in a way that you can increase velocity to value. So I think that was kind of perfectly timed. I also used to study social psychology, and so people are kind of very important to me, and it really is the aspect that always stood out to me from a DevOps community perspective, and one of the reasons that I sort of fell in love with this kind of work. And again, we see that culture is perhaps the most important part of this puzzle. You can have high levels of software velocity, stability, reliability, but if you don't have healthy culture, you're not going to have the same type of organizational performance. And if I was to pick another one, I guess I would say flexible infrastructure. It's one of the things that as practitioners we've always been talking about, like, hey, it really matters how you implement cloud, not just if you're using cloud. So I think that it's nice to be able to have that research to back kind of our anecdotal day to day, that things that we've known.
I think that's a great point. I mean, there's so many things I want to touch on, but that last one you're talking about, it's good to be able to use data for things that you kind of know. I mean, that's what's always interesting about the State of DevOps reports. When it comes out, you kind of knew a lot of this to be true. What's unique about this is now you actually have numbers and data behind it and actual scientific rigor, as opposed to like, I think this and I think that. And the one about team structure, going back to that one, team structure is such an interesting topic that's just been around forever. Very first early times in the career, 25 years ago, I'm sure 50 years ago before that, people are like, how do we organize people? Do we put all the experts together? Do we put people in their feature factories? Their job is to not even think about the customer, just do what they're told and implement the spec, the waterfall style. Do we, have our developers interacting directly with the customers? And that's actually better. Just all these different ideas. And what's interesting about this report is it actually found that one of them is significantly better than the other. And I'll see if I can pull it up because it is a huge one. Figure out how to do the table of contents. Because there was just they kind of broke it down into, oh yeah, I think it is here. If I can get that TLDR that you were. Anyways, why don't you talk about it while I find that section?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So, one of the things that we looked into this year was, user centrism, and being a user centric organization in compared to being a feature driven. Uh, you know, and what we found was, significant higher levels of organizational performance, team performance, software delivery performance, less burnout for teams that focused on being user centric in comparison to being feature driven. And so, again, this is kind of one of the things that we've known as practitioners in the industry, that this is the way to deliver value. But it's just really good to be able to have some quantifiable data around these topics.
And it goes more into quantifiable data because it's one thing like this. All right, the teams with a strong user focus have a 40% higher organizational performance. That's huge, right? And that's a big
It's
number to kind of
huge.
smack you over the head with. What I loved about this report specifically is then they took all these different key areas and practices and then rated how this affects those, which I found really interesting. Like, for example, software delivery performance actually didn't really change that much, maybe a little bit from what I can read here, but something like team performance, so not just the software delivery, but overall team performance, substantial increase. That was really interesting to see it broken down over here. Burnout doesn't really change burnout. Maybe it helps a little bit decreasing it, but job satisfaction up a ton. Developers more connected to users, just feel more satisfied about the work that they do.
Well, I mean, I think when you compare it to feature-driven organizations, you see much less burnout in user-driven organizations.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because there's another one where I think they were more explicit about comparing different styles to that one. I'll see if I can.
Yeah.
No one wants to watch me scroll around forever, but it's in there. This is a teaser and tell you why you need to download the report yourself. There was a third one that you mentioned, which I wanted to cover as well. Can you remind me what it was? The user-centric culture, and then the cloud availability.
Flexible infrastructure.
Flexible infrastructure. Talk about what that means a
Yeah.
little bit to me.
Sure, yeah. So previously, when we tried to understand if the respondents were using cloud, we kind of used like the five characteristics of cloud computing that's defined by the NIST. So things like measured service, rapid elasticity, broad network access, as a proxy for are you using cloud? And so this year, what we wanted to understand was we kind of broke those up and we asked very specifically about flexible infrastructure and very specifically about using cloud. And what we found was that cloud is an enabler of flexible infrastructure. Uh, but the way that you use cloud or the way that you implement cloud is the most important part. So if you use cloud while taking advantage of flexible infrastructure, you see increased markers basically across the board. If you use cloud without taking advantage of flexible infrastructure, you see decreased performance. And so, again, this is kind of something that we've known and that we've been talking about for a while, that, how you do these things is the important part, not just going to cloud. In fact, this is something that I work with a lot of customers around is they come and they say, okay, well, we've gone to cloud, but we're not really realizing this all of the value that we thought we were going to get out of cloud. Why is that? And as it turns out, they just shifted the data center operations into the cloud. They kept all of the process that they had from a data center perspective. They're still essentially using the same technologies in the same way. And okay, maybe they gained a little bit, like they don't have to worry about patching, or they don't have to worry about actually keeping the boxes on or the electricity, things like this. But for the most part, they just shifted the burden from their data centers to the cloud. Only now they're in a new environment that their folks don't know as well as they knew their on-prem environment. And so, the idea that you need to then take it the next step and start taking advantage of cloud native features and the differentiators in cloud.
Right. There was a question that I was going to ask you, your biggest surprise of this. And you kind of hinted at it a bit there, which is talking about how flexibility is important and how you move to the cloud. That one of the challenges with any of these type of take a complex subject and turn it down into one thing or the other is you oversimplify. And when you oversimplify, you miss nuance. And this, your cloud one is a great example. There's another one that's inside of this report, which shows that moving to a trunk-based development actually increases burnout. And so it's good on a bunch of other different measures, but that one specifically, people were like, wait, what the heck? If you just take that in isolation, that can be quite shocking. And one could even erroneously conclude, well, clearly we shouldn't do that. But when you actually dig into the data, you realize just the nuance of the situation. I think that's what's always interesting. You see these reports and you want those numbers. Those like, this is better than that. This is better than that. But you can't just stop there. You have to dig further and just use that as a starting point. Don't use it as the end of the discussion.
Yeah, and that's kind of a great way to think about the DORA metrics in general, is that I always recommend that people don't get too hyper fixated on what the numbers are. First of all, I always make sure to tell people, don't worry about being like low, medium, high, or any of that stuff. Just worry about, do you have the instrumentation to understand what's happening? And the point of doing that is because that allows you to drive continuous improvement. And what we've seen in previous years is, and again, anecdotally in my own work, is that companies that adopt this mindset of continuous improvement are the ones that are the most successful. And having these metrics as sort of a baseline is one of the ways that you can understand when you're starting to tweak the levers. Are your tweaks having a impact on your software delivery process?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And that kind of leads me into the next section, which, again, we could talk about this report all day long. There's all these interesting sections, insights, whatever else. But we were talking about it earlier, and I kind of almost want to use that as the anchor for this next part of the conversation. We were talking about how DORA metrics is one that there is a group that is the true believers, that they get it. We were both just at the first ever DevOps. Would you call it a DORA conference?
DORA Community Summit.
DORA Community Summit. Thank you. We were at the DORA Community Summit, and we looked at, and it was filled with a bunch of people that were all in. Like the thing I was telling you as well is there was a talk by Dr. Nicole. Pronounce her last name. I always get it wrong.
Forsgren.
Thank you, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, where she was talking about space metrics. And then we did breakouts, and that was, as far as I could tell, the largest breakout, because people were like, I want this. Did they know what it was? No. But were they excited about it? Yes. And were they sure it was good for them? Yes. I mean, that's just all the classic signs of an early adopter. But when you go to these different breakouts where people talked about what was important to them, one of the things that came up again and again is, how do I move it beyond my team? How do I get it beyond? So I'm an EM, engineering manager. I'm using DORA metrics. I'm getting value. Having a hard time convincing the CTO. Having a hard time convincing peers. How do we move it beyond? And I know I've seen that as well. As someone who sells a product that helps people track and improve the DORA metric, we see that all the time. We're talking to the believers. We're talking to the champions. And their struggle is, how do I get other people to see this value? Because continuous improvement is, I think we would all agree, a good thing. But it's also not something that your house is going to burn down if you don't do it today. And so often these important but non-urgent tasks, going back to that kind of, well, not back, but that quadrant, which kind of shows important, not urgent, tend to get abandoned. So this is where I wanted to get your particular perspective as an expert, not only in the DORA world for much longer than I have, and many people, you were chef before this. I mean, you've seen all kinds of things. How do you answer someone who's struggling with that, crossing that chasm, going from I'm the believer, but I need to convince people who have their own fires going on that this is important?
Yeah, it's a typical problem, and it also was the topic of many discussions at the DORA Community Summit, and also just at the DevOps Enterprise Summit as a whole. And I think it's really important to remember that the reason that we're doing these things is to improve things for the business. And so when we're thinking about making improvements to DevOps or SRE or anything else, we should only be doing these things to improve the business. That's the whole reason, why we're doing these things. And so in that vein, what I have done in the past that's been very successful is, obviously we like dashboards, we like stats, we like metrics, and DORA metrics are great. And creating dashboards around DORA metrics is fantastic. But I always recommend going the extra mile and pairing business outcomes or business metrics on the same visualization that you have the DORA metrics. So let's say that you're working with a specific application or service, and you take like NPS scores as an example, or revenue, or whatever, fill in the blank for whatever business goals you have. Being able to visualize those business goals alongside the DORA metrics starts to tell a really powerful story. And what I've seen in the past work very successfully is, as we're improving the velocity and the stability and the reliability of a service, we are also adding business value by driving improvements in the areas that business wants to see. And so then it becomes, instead of the team having to go out and evangelize these things as to, hey guys, DORA is awesome. You all need to do DORA because DORA is cool. Well, now we have teams knocking on the door saying, hold on a second, how are you increasing these business metrics over here so successfully? And then it opens up the conversation. Well, let me show you. This is exactly how we're doing it.
Right, right. Yeah, that's something I had never really thought about until we were discussing there. It's just not, and we're not just talking like, lower level tactical business measures. You're talking about stuff like revenue. You're talking about stuff like NPS. You're talking about stuff that is top of mind to any exec team out there. And to draw that correlation in your technology leaders and perhaps even in your executive level's mind, that these two things are related. They're not right. Something that devs do all the time, which is, why should we do something? Because it's right, because it's proper. And then that's kind of good enough. Good devs are good with there. Like, oh, we should refactor all this because it's the right thing to do. Whereas an executive team is going to be a little bit more, as you say, very business oriented there. And so it's not about, is DORA right? It's about, I have fixed amount of resources and I have to achieve these goals. What's going to help me do that? And I want to know that it's going to move the metrics that I most care about, which are revenue, which is NPS.
That's right. And I think the other thing that it does is it increases agency with the developers, and it also the other piece to this is leadership needs to, instead of thinking of developers as being, folks that respond to a list of tasks, opening up metrics and information of that relate to the business goals, and then empowering developers to solve problems, specifically solving business problems using technology, is a really great additional enabler to this story as well. Because now the developers feel more empowered to solve the business problems and to try new things that are going to drive those business metrics, as opposed to just being focused on, hey, this is the technology and we're doing the technology in isolation.
And that kind of gets back to that finding about user facing being more effective, because you do have that connection outside. And then DORA metrics being an interesting enabler of that connection. Never thought of it quite that way. Can you tell me, because one thing I have to ask because of where you're at, you got a ton of stories. I mean, you're taking companies that, as you said, barely do continuous integration to DORA. You're taking ones that think they're good, but then feel like they still have rooms to grow. Can you maybe kind of tell us one of those success stories to kind of help us picture in our mind what it looked like, what worked, what didn't, kind of take us in there?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the most of the engagements start with just understanding what their business goals are and what the needs are, and then kind of getting an understanding for the landscape. So most recently, I was working with a company that has a very strong technical ability. And I started working with the chief architect, and he was showing me their platform. And I remember kind of walking away from that initial conversation thinking, wow, this is a pretty advanced technological platform that they have. Why do they need our help? Then we started digging into, how users interact with that platform. And as it turns out, it took users over 100 days to get an application up and running on this platform. And it wasn't because the technology platform wasn't automated, because there was a lot of automation and a lot of cool stuff built in. It was all of the manual change approval processes. It was the, Sally needs to write something down on a piece of paper and take it down the hallway to Carol and have her sign off on it and then move it over to Bob. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but that is kind of how the process was.
I've seen worse.
um, yeah, and so that was just really interesting. And so we're currently in the process of, looking outside of the pipeline and looking outside of the platform, and addressing these additional complexities around change approval.
So that was a fascinating case because just to repair it back to you. So technology wise, they were very advanced. They had all their stuff together. They were doing the latest, I'm guessing the latest, infrastructure as code. They were doing the latest, shift left on security. I'm just making stuff up, but I'm going to imagine these type of practices were not new to them. But then when you applied, and I'm taking a little bit of leap, when you applied DORA metrics and you kind of looked at, say, the change lead time of when something was ready to when it actually went out, it was actually quite long, even though everything was automated. How long did it take from they press the button to it's in live? It's very quick. There's all the little people bits kind of in the middle. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the actual lead time for change was pretty quick. Once they were able to get something on the platform, it was the getting things onto the platform that took forever. um, right? So just creating a project that folks could interact with took quite a long time. And so, as they're in this stage of their cloud migration, they have these, they have these business goals from their C level that, hey, we want to move all of our applications onto cloud by X date. okay, well, that's cool. But the point of taking an application from the data center and putting it into the cloud, that's what was taking, up to 100 days. And this is very common. Like I've worked with other organizations where basically the same thing. And what we did was we got everybody in a room together and we walked through the process from start to finish. Now, first, one interesting outcome of that event was the fact that none of those people, or some of those people had never been in a room together, but yet they were all highly dependent on each other in order for somebody to move something into the cloud. And we were able in that case to take a process that took sometimes up to 12, 24 weeks and condense it down into a matter of minutes. And because
Hmm.
nobody had really done the work of understanding what the full process is from start to finish, to get a project, in this case, launched in Google Cloud.
Interesting. So maybe this is hard for you to answer off the top of your head, but what percentage would you say when you're looking at helping people transform adopt DORA, what percentage of the issues are technology, like you need to adopt CD and you need to automate this and automate that, turn that into shell script? And what percentage of them are kind of people and process things?
In my experience, the vast majority of the problems are around people and process. Yeah. And it that's kind of reflected in Dora, like this year I mentioned culture and being user centric. So it's you can have high levels or higher levels of software delivery and operations, but unless you have that cultural aspect, you're not necessarily going to see the higher performance from an organizational perspective. And so, now of course, there's always work to be done from a technical perspective. And oftentimes what I see is that if you're at the very kind of lower end of performance, taking you from the low end to the medium area from a technical perspective can have great benefits. But then oftentimes when you get into the medium area, looking outside of the pipeline and start looking at like the change approval process, the way that teams are organized, the way that teams think about delivering like features versus value, then those types of things can have much more impact than moving from like a medium performing software shop to like a high performing. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying if you don't have any tech and you're kind of at the beginning stage, then the first piece of tech you put in will make a big difference. But then
Yes,
after that, you're not going to get as much because now your bottleneck is the people process stuff.
that's
And you really
correct.
should go to that before you keep going down trying to do full continuous deployment or
That's correct. Yep. Starting to look at like the flow blockers.
right. Yeah, that's interesting. When you take all of this information and again, all your experience in kind of doing it, because I'd love to keep you forever. I know I'm already 4 minutes over what I promised you, but it's such interesting stuff, and I'd love to hear your perspective. But I didn't want to go leave this conversation without you maybe summarizing kind of the number one pitfall that you see when people do DORA. I mean, we've kind of hinted at some different parts, but if you just kind of like, I guess I would ask two-parter. One is if someone's brand new to DORA, what steps should they take? And then what's the one thing they should look out for?
Yeah, the one step I always recommend is just get started. Just start doing work. There's so many times that I've been working with folks that they sort of get paralyzed in the planning stage. And it's far more important to just roll your sleeves up and to just start doing stuff than to continuously like plan and really even to create like a long-term plan from a technical perspective. So I would say that that's another thing that what I recommend is let's just create a 1 month plan and let's work for a month and do some stuff and see how what the impact is having, see if we're heading in the right direction. Are we heading in the right direction of our business objectives that we talked about initially? And if we are, great, let's keep going. But if we're not, like let's stop in a month rather than stopping in a year, and let's figure out like what can we do to sort of course correct and navigate in a slightly different direction. The other thing I will say is this idea of maturity. I think teams oftentimes get too wrapped up in the actual numbers, where they'll set an OKR for, we want to be a medium performer. Well, I always recommend that that's a very bad idea and a very bad way to think about the metrics, and frankly, to use the metrics. In the report still say, hey, look at it, we have these four categories: low, medium, high, and elite. And we are kind of thinking about, maybe evolving the way that we talk about this. So I do take some responsibility for this. But yeah, I mean, thinking about these in a maturity way, rather than thinking about this as a way to drive capability improvements, is another thing that I see often that I have to course correct on.
Yeah, that one's a great one. Especially, I would just want to echo that point about starting a big project. I mean, I hear that all the time. Obviously, I'm a vendor of a tool that helps you with this stuff. Is those folks that come in and want to like kick off a long big project and want to spend 3 months to get all the numbers right before they even start working on things. And as much as I want them to do that, because then they'll find our tool critical to the whole process or whatever, I just know, like, from a personal standpoint, from my experience, kind of almost better if you just start fixing something. Like, do a quick assessment, know kind of where you are. And actually, really, if you talk to your devs, they probably already know where you are. Your EMs probably already know where you are. And so what if you just make a couple improvements, then you start tracking, and you just kind of do things a little bit smaller than these big, long projects.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. And actually, kind of going back to the other one, you talk about the number one problem of the early adopters trying to convince other people. Trying to convince them of a 9-month project, that's always going to be a harder sell than, hey, why don't you try this for a month? And if it doesn't go anywhere, great. And if it does, hey, great.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah, that's some great insights. Eric, I could talk to you forever. I really appreciate you spending your time. As I said, I love that perspective of somebody who takes the theory and takes the marketing and the ideas and puts them into practice, sees what works, sees what doesn't. And thanks for coming and sharing that information with us. Again, if you're interested in this, you can interact with Eric, myself, more folks. If you go to DORA.dev, there's a community, there's a mailing list. Can jump on that. We now have a summit, I guess. I don't know if this is an annual summit, but
it is. Yep.
All right. So we have that as well, where you can meet all the people involved in this thing. But kind of most importantly, going back to Eric's point, I think the thing I want to end with is just get started.
Yep.
Don't overcomplicate it. Don't try to make a giant plan before you even start. No, just start now, because it's a continuous loop. That's the key. I think you were talking about that before. That continuous improvement is the key, not the one time, then we're done. It's more start up a muscle.
That's right. And, let's be honest, if you're not continuously improving, you're actually falling behind, because everybody else is continuously improving around you. And we see that in the performance year over year. I mean, this is our 9th year of doing this research. And, when you look at what is an elite performer today versus, 6 years ago, it's dramatically different.
Right. That's a great point. And again, it's not just for improving for the sake of it, but this is tied to business goals, tied to business execution and things. So again, take a look at the report, DORA.dev, join the community, join the discussion. Thank you very much, Eric, for joining us. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great speaking with you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thanks again to all of you for joining us here at Sleuth TV Live. Again, feel free to ask questions in the comments if you want to have more information. Of course, if you're interested about Sleuth itself and how to use a tool to help automate some of these parts, including the improving part, Sleuth.io is where to go. Joining the DORA community, DORA.dev is where to go. So I recommend both. Thank you very much. That's all for me here at Dawn at Sleuth. Thanks again to Eric for joining me, and I'll catch you next time.
Thanks.
Elite software teams demand great efficiency and developer experience. We're talking high output, reliability, and morale. What's their secret? They've hand-built a platform to power a continuous improvement loop. And now you can have that too. Sleuth is your platform to empower this continuous loop. Quickly pinpoint areas needing improvement. Implement those improvements instantly with automations and automatically measure their impact. Continuously improve as elite teams do with Sleuth automations.